Good morning.
Good morning.
Dear fellow Rotarians and guests, of the 20 or so of these talks that I have given, 12 of them at our club, this may be the single most important one, in my opinion. So here I go. Vaccines are key to our survival. They were developed in 1796, the first one, by Edward Jenner for smallpox. So there's a long history with vaccines. Since then, we now have over 30 vaccines that are effective for a variety of different diseases. And the approach is relatively simple. We're not inventing gunpowder. This has been done many times. You take the virus or the pathogen that's attacking you and you want to develop a vaccine, and you choose an entity, a protein many times, on the surface of the virus. In the case of SARS-CoV-2, the most popular for that purpose has been the spike protein, right here. And a number of the vaccines are directed specifically against the spike protein. And what happens is, a vaccine is made, you get inoculated, the antigen is injected, the immune system reacts, and antibodies and T cells are produced. And those antibodies are very effective at attaching to the spike protein and blocking so that that virus cannot attach anywhere else. Those are called neutralizing antibodies. And then there are the T cells that actually kill the virus, the killer T cells. The antigen is the target for the antibodies and the T cells. The vaccine intends for us to hit that target. I have spoken to you before about the concept of self versus non-self, which is at the very heart of immunity. Our immune system protects us because it recognizes what we are self. Our immune system does not attack self. But if there's a foreign entity that's inside of us, that's attacking us, it's non-self, and our immune system will defend us against it. You take a vaccine, please mute yourselves. You take a vaccine, you inject it, and our immune system produces antibodies and T cells. And those antibodies and T cells attack the virus, which in this case is the foreign entity that's within us. And that's how vaccines work. Now, we have had a number of vaccines in clinical trials. There's over 200 vaccines in development. Most of them it's still in the laboratory. But there are some that are in clinical trials. And the top ones that I will mention today, because they're the most advanced non-Chinese, I won't go into the ones being developed in China, are the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, and they have reported on 1,077 subjects immunized. And then there's the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine, and they've treated 45 subjects in one study and 60 in another study. And then there's the Moderna vaccine, where they have reported on 45 subjects. Now, that doesn't mean that this is all of the experience that exists. They have probably treated more, but to date, they have reported on these subjects actually in the medical literature, in actual scientific reports that anyone can access. And all of the data up to the date that they collected data for that report is in those papers. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about. These are the clinical trial results to date. And first, let's talk about adverse events. And I've chosen to speak to you about the adverse events seen in the Oxford AstraZeneca study because they're exemplary. The adverse events are pretty similar for the other vaccines, for the Pfizer, for the Moderna, for other vaccines, pretty similar. In fact, pretty similar to some other non-COVID vaccines. And this chart, it may be difficult to see, but the important thing here is that with the first dose of the vaccine, locally, you will see pain and tenderness. And that will occur in up to 40%, 50% of subjects. It is mild in severity, mostly mild in severity. A few subjects will have moderate discomfort. For the second dose, all of that goes down and is minimal. There will be some tenderness, but otherwise no major local symptoms. Now let's look at symptoms that are distant, that are systemic. And the most significant ones are chills, fever, a feeling of being feverish with not documented fever. Headache is perhaps the single most bothersome adverse event. And as you see, it may last 4 days, becomes mild after the first 2 days. Some malaise and some muscle aches. For the second dose, those go down significantly. And you might say, well, that's a lot of symptoms. That's a lot of adverse events. So compared to this, the flu shot, soreness, redness, and swelling occurs in about 64% of immunized subjects. Headache occurs, fever occurs in up to a third, nausea, muscle aches in 14%, and we take the flu shot with no problem. And these symptoms are usually mild and they go away in a few days. We don't think much about it. It's just one more vaccine, right? But I'd like to highlight that with the COVID vaccines and with COVID in general, we are acting like scared children. We're acting like we're inventing the wheel. And that, my friends, is not correct. There's so much experience with vaccines. What's being done with the COVID vaccines has been done time and again with close to 30 or more vaccines that we have developed over time. This is not that significantly different in the technology, in the adverse events, or in the efficacy, as I will show you in a minute. The immunized subjects, 90 to 100% produce antibodies and spike-specific T cells. One of the stories that has been going around is that you get immunized and you might not develop antibodies. Well, my friends, you do. You develop antibodies, and I'll show you what they do. The antibodies have been found to be both binding and neutralizing antibodies. These are protective, these are effective antibodies. The other story that's going around that is totally incorrect is that these antibodies do not last very long. Wrong. The experience is that they remain elevated at day 56. And beyond that, and I'm saying day 56 because that's the last time point where they collected data. But that doesn't mean it stopped there, it goes on. And further experience will be reported later on as to how long they actually last. But the quantity of antibodies that I have seen that they have reported at day 56 is such that I expect these antibodies will remain effective in our bloodstream for 6 months or more. And that, my friends, is very significant. And not only that, but the second Pfizer study where they have followed these patients more precisely. They not only have shown that they last until day 56 and beyond, they have shown that they are increasing in quantity at that point in time. So we have to dispel all of those unfounded fears based on things that people are saying with no basis in science or data. And not only antibodies, but immunized subjects produce T cells that are spike specific. They are specific to the spike on the surface of the virus. This is very important because it means that they go directly to the virus and attack the virus. 94% of these T cells are what is called a CD4 or T4 helper cell. 80% of these are the very important CD8 killer cells and also regulatory cells. And also what people are ignoring is that you not only develop T cells, and you don't only develop the first 3 bullet points that I have mentioned here, but you develop memory T cells. So even if the T cells decrease over time, there are memory T cells, which in case of being exposed the second time to the virus, these memory cells will see the virus, understand what it is, and develop a second immune response against it. So these are very important, the memory T cells. The B cells, the mature B cells, and particularly the plasma cells, are the ones that secrete antibodies. And we are triggering a tremendous B cell response with the vaccines. And not only do we trigger the antibody producing B cells, but also regulatory B cells, and importantly again, memory B cells, which just like the memory T cells, remain for prolonged periods of time in our system. And in case of a second or a third exposure to the virus, will trigger an immune response and will kill the virus. Now, COVID-19 has killed an average of 770 Americans every day this year. And that's for the 240 days from January to August. And that is an average over time. More recently, in fact, yesterday, we exceeded 1,000 deaths. Thus, every month of delay in approval of a vaccine will cost 23,000 lives. Every year of delay in approval of a vaccine will cost 277,000 lives. Now, the FDA requires 30,000 subjects be studied, and if so, approval will take until mid-2022. That is not sustainable. That is unconscionable. Vaccines need to be approved now. Vaccines are approvable now. There is a provision in FDA regulations that has not been mentioned in the media, and that is accelerated approval. Accelerated approval allows the FDA to approve a worthwhile product, a worthwhile treatment, in this case a vaccine, when there is sufficient evidence that it works, like we have shown, like I have shown to you today. And that is an approval that makes that vaccine available to everyone. It is not restricted to the hospitalized. It's not restricted to certain populations. It makes it available to everyone. It is contingent, however, on those companies that produce a vaccine completing phase 3 trials to enforce, to sustain, and to be consistent with the initial reports. There is some risk there. There is some risk that something might be shown to be wrong in those phase 3 trials. But over time, there has been a lot of experience with this, and that situation is unusual. Unusual. Yes, those phase 3 trials expand our knowledge of the product. It allows us to handle it medically in better ways. but very few, if any, products that have undergone accelerated approval have been withdrawn from the market. Very few, they are the exception. So we need to approve the vaccine now. There is sufficient evidence to approve the vaccine now. There is a little bit of risk, but there are deaths occurring, there are lives at stake. Those vaccines need to be approved now. Thank you.
Okay. Antonio, thank you so much.